Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control. The United States is in the state of war. Undeclared total war. All this freedom will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives.
In this video, I'm going to cover a much requested video of a man named Yuri Bezmenov, who was a KGB who did the following interview in 1984. So without saying anything else, let's get into the clips.
You spoke several times before about ideological subversion. That is a phrase that I'm afraid some Americans don't fully understand. When the Soviets use the phrase ideological subversion, what do they mean by it?
Ideological subversion is the process which is legitimate, overt, and open. You can see it with your own eyes. All you have to do, all American mass media has to do, is to unplug their bananas from their ears, open up their eyes, and they can see it. There is no mystery. There is nothing to do with espionage. I know that espionage intelligence gathering looks more romantic. It sells more deodorants through the advertising, probably. That's why your Hollywood producers are so crazy about James Bond type of thrillers. But in reality, the main emphasis of the KGB is not in the area of intelligence at all. According to my opinion and opinion of many defectors of my caliber, only about 15% of time, money, and manpower is spent on espionage as such. The other 85% is a slow process which we call either ideological subversion or active measures, активные мероприятия in the language of the KGB, or psychological warfare. What it basically means is to change the perception of reality of every American to such an extent that despite of the abundance of information, no one is able to come to sensible conclusions in the interests of defending themselves, their families, their community, and their country. It's a great brainwashing process which goes very slow, and it's divided in 4 basic stages. The first one being demoralization. It takes from 15 to 20 years to demoralize a nation. Why that many years? Because this is the minimum number of years which requires to educate 1 generation of students in the country of your enemy, exposed to the ideology of the enemy. In other words, Marxism-Leninism ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of at least 3 generations of American students without being challenged or counterbalanced by the basic values of Americanism, American patriotism. The result you can see.
So, ideological subversion or active measures. He mentions here that Marxist-Leninist ideology is being pumped into the soft heads of generations of American students, and all other Western countries for that matter. And this is obviously true and well documented that the long march through the institutions, or the Cultural Revolution as I like to call it, has been happening for decades. And what this refers to is a systematic undermining of Western culture, a gradual process of capturing essential institutions such as schools, legal institutions, universities, big corporations, and ultimately government. This is absolutely undeniable these days, and it seems sometimes as though we are moving at breakneck speed towards a complete cultural overhaul. Just take a cursory glance at Hollywood and some of the hideously woke movies that are coming out, and the rewriting of history that's happening, or the advertising for brands and corporations that seeks to cram LGBTQ propaganda down our throats constantly in order to meet their ESG scores.
Hi, it's me, Patagonia, a real-life homosexual. And today I'm here with the North Face. We are here to invite you to come out in nature with us.
And I know sometimes it seems as though this is just sensory overload, but it's something that's been happening for quite a long time, and something that's been a slow and gradual process. And the idea behind this process, as we know if we watch the channel, is called cultural Marxism. And one might point to the 1960s when the Frankfurt School took refuge in the Western education system, particularly in America, and started pumping Marxist culturally revolutionary propaganda into the minds of the next generations. But now, these days, we are seeing this reach a fever pitch, with the plan now at the stage where big bureaucratic corporations are now filled with these ideologues in their HR, marketing, and communications departments. Just look what happened to Bud Light.
See, most of the people who graduated in the 60s, dropouts or half-baked intellectuals, are now occupying the positions of power in the government, civil service, business, mass media, educational system. You are stuck with them. You cannot get rid of them. They are contaminated. They are programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in a certain pattern. You cannot change their mind, even if you expose them to authentic information, even if you prove that white is white and black is black. You still cannot change the basic perception and the logic of behavior. In other words, these people, the process of demoralization is complete and irreversible. To get rid society of these people, you need another 20 or 15 years to educate a new generation of patriotically minded.
Guys, if you enjoy being armed and dangerous with these breakdowns, then make sure to leave me a like. Helps me to spread this message far and wide, and also leave me a comment. Tell me what your thoughts are, subscribe to the channel, and all that good stuff. Back to the clips.
And common sense people who would be acting in favor and in the interests of the United States society.
And yet these people who've been programmed and, as you say, in place, and
Yes.
who are favorable to an opening with the Soviet concept, these are the very people who would be marked for extermination in this country?
Most of them, yes. Simply because the psychological shock when they will see in future what the beautiful society of equality and social justice means in practice, obviously they will revolt. They will be very unhappy, frustrated people. And the Marxist-Leninist regime does not tolerate these people. Obviously they will join the links of dissenters, dissidents.
Yes.
Unlike in present United States, there will be no place for dissent in future Marxist-Leninist America. Here you can get popular like Daniel Ellsberg and filthy rich like Jane Fonda for being dissident, for criticizing your Pentagon. In future, these people will be simply squashed like cockroaches. Nobody is going to pay them nothing for their beautiful, noble ideas of equality. This they don't understand, and it will be greatest shock for them, of course.
Half-baked intellectuals occupying positions of power, and we're stuck with them. Well said, Yuri. And there are some very interesting points here. He mentions that they're programmed to think and react to certain stimuli in certain patterns. And I think there he's referring to what's called Pavlov's classical conditioning. And you may have heard of Pavlov's dogs. But what classical conditioning refers to is a learning process governed by associations between an environmental stimulus and another stimulus which occurs naturally. All classical conditioning learning involves environmental interaction. And funnily enough, leader of the Russian Revolution, Vladimir Lenin, actually visited Pavlov's laboratory, and he asked for his help in shaping human behavior to conform to communist thinking. He wanted to standardize Russian people and have them thinking in the exact same way. And the Soviets always supported Pavlov, and even Stalin during his Great Purge protected him, which shows that obviously he had quite a significant role to play in the Soviet Union and the government. But this obsession with brainwashing or coercive persuasion was not simply limited to the Soviets. The USA also saw what was happening in the East and wanted to get a piece of the pie. And the CIA began funding and working with academics, which would lead to what we now know as MKUltra, one of the craziest conspiracy theories which has ever turned out to be totally true, where the US government did mind control experiments on people using LSD. And now that is a rabbit hole that you can go down in your own time. But what I mean to say here is that experimentation with neural and behavioral conditioning is not simply limited to the Soviets. And the fall of the Soviet Union did not represent the very last time in which anybody would ever try and perpetrate ideological subversion on a population. And towards the end of this video, I'll get to exactly how this is being used today and where we can see it.
The demoralization process in the United States is basically completed already. For the last 25 years, actually it's overfulfilled, because demoralization now reaches such areas where previously not even Comrade Andropov and all his experts would even dream of such a tremendous success. Most of it is done by Americans to Americans, thanks to lack of moral standards. As I mentioned before, exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. Even if I shower him with information, with authentic proof, with documents, with pictures, even if I take him by force to the Soviet Union and show him concentration camp, he will refuse to believe it until he is going to receive a kick in his fat bottom. When a military boot crashes then he will understand, but not before that. That's the tragic of the situation of demoralization. So basically America is stuck with demoralization, and unless, even if you start right now, here, this minute, you start educating new generation of Americans, it will still take you 15 to 20 years to turn the tide of ideological perception of reality back to normalcy and patriotism.
Now, another great quote: a person who is demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him. And this is important to understand, because when you think of a demoralized individual, you tend to think of a broken and weak person who's given up hope. Somebody who mopes around with their shoulders hunched forward. But I don't think that's really what he's talking about here. In the sense that Yuri's talking about here, I think he's referring to a basic loss of moral standards and ethics, where basic facts and reality have been obfuscated to the point where, like he said, even if you shower them with facts, they will still refuse to believe it. Even if you tell them 2 + 2 is 4 and you show them all of the evidence, they will not believe you. Even if you tell them explicitly that men can't menstruate, they will not believe it. They've lost their ability to have a fundamental set of moral standards that guides their beliefs and their worldviews. And they're no longer anchored to basic fundamental truths. And this allows them to be easily influenced and captured by any ridiculous and whimsical ideological notion that comes forth. And this is something that's so common today, with vast swathes of the population demoralized. They've lost the ability to have basic discernment and wisdom to stand up and say, no, I will not do that. And I will not say what you're telling me to say because I know it's wrong. It's just, yes, sir, I will wear 4 masks and get my 9th booster and put the black square on my Instagram because the box in the living room that talks to me sometimes told me to do it.
The sharing of biased and false news has become all too common on social media. More alarming, some media outlets publish these same fake stories without checking facts first.
Their own personal bias and agenda to control exactly what people think. And this is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
This is extremely dangerous to our democracy.
The next stage is destabilization. This time, subverter does not care about your ideas and the patterns of your consumption. Whether you eat junk food and get fat and flabby, it doesn't matter anymore. This time, and it takes only from 2 to 5 years to destabilize a nation, what matters is essentials: economy, foreign relations, defense systems. And you can see it quite clearly that in some areas, in such sensitive areas as defense and economy, the influence of Marxist-Leninist ideas in the United States is absolutely fantastic. I could never believe it 14 years ago when I landed in this part of the world that the process will go that fast. The next stage, of course, is crisis. It may take only up to 6 weeks to bring a country to the verge of crisis. You can see it in Central America now. And after crisis, with a violent change of power, structure, and economy, you have so-called the period of normalization. It may last indefinitely. Normalization is a cynical expression borrowed from Soviet propaganda. When the Soviet tanks moved into Czechoslovakia in '68, Comrade Brezhnev said, now the situation in brotherly Czechoslovakia is normalized. This is what will happen in the United States if you allow all these schmucks to bring the country to crisis, to promise people all kind of goodies and the paradise on earth, to destabilize your economy, to eliminate the principle of free market competition and to put a big brother government in Washington, D.C., with the benevolent dictators like Walter Mondale, who will promise lots of things, never mind whether the promises are fulfillable or not. He will go to Moscow to kiss the bottoms of new generation of Soviet assassins. Never mind, he will create false illusions that the situation is under control. Situation is not under control. Situation is disgustingly out of control.
Now, I want to look at this quickly through the modern lens, rather than the 1984 lens when this was filmed. At this time, the Cold War was still happening and the Soviet Union had not yet dissolved. So there was still all this threat and fear from the East, which is fair enough. And the plan that he's talking about here didn't come to fruition in the sense that the US never became some Marxist-Leninist state, well, not explicitly, that were kissing the bottoms of the Soviet Union. But there's no doubt in my mind that the exact plan that he's talking about was once upon a time in full swing. But how far they got and what impact it had in terms of what we're seeing today, I'm not too sure. But just as a matter of history, and because it's pretty cool and interesting, we'll go through a little bit about what he's talking about here. So who are the KGB? The KGB were an independent government agency, so not a part of the Red Army, during the time of the Soviet Union. In English, it translates to Committee for State Security. They were an intelligence agency for the USSR, but also a form of secret police, ensuring that citizens stayed in line with Soviet ideals, and dissidence was dealt with swiftly and quietly. And it's commonly known that Vladimir Putin himself was actually a KGB agent back in the day. And also, it's well-documented history that there were many KGB spies in the United States during the Cold War. And this was a big concern in the United States at the time due to what they thought that these KGB spies were doing to society and to political ideals. And there was a big investigation spearheaded by Senator Joseph McCarthy that led to hundreds of accusations of treason and subversion. And estimates say that there were hundreds also imprisoned for being spies. And subsequently, reportedly, the number of Soviet spies would drastically decrease throughout the 1950s, with the last reported major illegal spy, a guy named Rudolf Abel, being betrayed by his assistant in 1957. The KGB also interfered heavily in politics in places like Southern Asia and Afghanistan in the 1970s. But they weren't overly successful in their attempts to spread communism throughout the world. And just to demonstrate how powerful they really were, in 1962, the man who had pretty much succeeded Joseph Stalin and oversaw the de-Stalinization of the Soviet Union, Nikita Khrushchev, was basically removed from office by the KGB. He would spend the rest of his days in a house, paid for and monitored by the KGB, who would record his every word and all of his visitors. And in August 1991, the chairman of the KGB, Vladimir Khrushchev, launched a coup against the leader at the time, Mikhail Gorbachev, with the intention of re-centralizing Soviet power in Russia and removing the increased liberty that had been given to Soviet states. And 2 days later, this would fail, marking the complete dissolution of the KGB and the USSR. So as we can see, Bezmenov was not lying when he talks about the KGB using ideological subversion to not only spread communism within the Soviet Union, but also around the world. And we know that there were many spies in America in the middle of the 20th century, and I doubt they were there to visit the Grand Canyon. However, due to the fall of the Soviet Union, obviously this vision never came to fruition. But does that mean that rampant Marxist ideological subversion is not still taking place? Absolutely not, because Marxism, unfortunately, is an intellectual intoxicant that we will be fighting as long as the sun shines. And the main ways in which we're seeing that today is obviously the cultural revolution that we're seeing taking place, as well as also extremely blatant ideological subversion taking place on TikTok, where the Chinese government is filling the heads of Western children with all sorts of propaganda and who knows what else, whilst their own children are shown videos about becoming doctors and engineers. Now, you can call that a conspiracy theory if you want, but think about it. If you have complete control over the minds of the youth of your biggest opponent on the world stage, then you're going to use that to your tactical advantage and destabilize them. And destabilized we are. So how do you think this is happening today? I mean, based on your knowledge of ideological subversion and everything we've talked about so far, where can we see this? Leave it in the comments.
Most of the American politicians, media, and educational system trains another generation of people who think they are living at a peacetime. False. The United States is in the state of war, undeclared total war against the basic principles and the foundations of this system. And the initiator of this war is not Comrade Andropov, of course. It's the system. However ridiculous it may sound, the world communist system or the world communist conspiracy, whether I scare some people or not, I don't give a hoot. If you are not scared by now, nothing can scare you. But you don't have to be paranoid about it. What actually happens now, that unlike myself, you have literally several years to live on unless the United States wake up. The time bomb is ticking. With every second, the disaster is coming closer and closer. Unlike myself, you will have nowhere to defect to, unless you want to live in Antarctica with penguins. This is it. This is the last country of freedom and possibility.
Okay, so what do we do? What is your recommendation to the American people?
Well, the immediate thing that comes to my mind is, of course, there must be a very strong national effort to educate people in the spirit of real patriotism, number one. Number two, to explain them the real danger of socialist, communist, whatever, welfare state, big brother government. If people will fail to grasp the impending danger of that development, nothing ever can help United States. You may kiss goodbye to your freedom, including freedoms to homosexuals, to prison inmate. All this freedom will vanish, evaporate in 5 seconds, including your precious lives.
This one really hits home for me. I mean, the last place of freedom and possibility. And the worldwide communist conspiracy, like he said again, is real, and it just morphs and it takes different forms and shapes as time goes on. And America is the last place. And this is why I'm such a great admirer of America and of the Constitution and of the First and Second Amendments, because they're such incredibly important aspects of a free culture. Two things that we don't have in Australia. And anybody who was watching during the pandemic saw how easily our people were pushed around by our government. They turned into authoritarian leaders who had their own Gestapos. And Australia, as hard as this is to say for me, is a demoralized nation. We don't have the cultural backbone that a country like the US has, because things have always been pretty cushy for us. The closest thing that we have to a great understanding and respect for the real essence of freedom is that we had so many young boys, the Anzac soldiers, go and die on the beaches in Gallipoli in World War I. And much of the old generation are connected to that, but unfortunately, the younger generation don't even really care about it. They have no respect for the cost of freedom, and they're easily led astray. And in the US, at least there are enough people who care about and value freedom enough to know when it's being taken away, and that when that time comes, we'll stand up. So I hope you guys enjoyed that one. As per usual, links all in the bio, top of the comments. Find me on my other channels, find me on social medias, and if you guys want to watch another video, click right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is Rattlesnake TV, keeping you armed and dangerous.